This will be my first review. It is of this book that I've placed precariously on top of a stack of paperbacks. It is The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. And I haven't prepared anything. I don't have any notes. I only have this strawberry soda to help me. So I'm just gonna talk off the top of my head about what I thought about the book, liked and disliked. And I haven't read any other criticism or reviews of it, so if I accidentally say something smart, that's to my credit. If my interpretation is way off, then that's also to my credit. So all I knew about this book when I picked it up for $4.50 was that it was reputed to be one of the best first contact stories, or the best first contact story ever written in novel form. And having just completed this, I would say that that is roughly accurate. First contact novels are not my typical genre. I tend to find those stories a little, well, that's not true. I read Childhood's End, which I really liked, and A Deepness in the Sky by Werner Vinge, which I would say is, in terms of the content and feel of this book, is probably the closest analog I can think of. But this, I think, is not necessarily a better book than that, but it is a more fun book. And it does a lot of things really extraordinarily well, and it keeps a lot of different plates spinning to an impressive degree. So this is a huge thumbs up for me. It has essentially nothing wrong with it, or very little wrong with it. There's very little to poke a stick at in terms of stuff that it doesn't do well. I mean, the only criticisms I have are certain things that it did well that it could have done better. And as far as it's a first contact story, it's also kind of a action adventure story. It's a mystery. It's a romance, although not a great one, which I'll talk about, I'm sure. It's space opera. It is, I think, more than anything, a novel about diplomacy. It's a novel about war and politics and religion and big questions, but it doesn't feel like it. It's really tautly written despite its length. It's really pretty concise considering what it accomplishes and the amount of ground that it covers. It doesn't quite find its footing until around 50 pages in, which is typical of a lot, I would say the majority of science fiction books. So when you're in that first little introductory period, it can be kind of disorienting and a little bit confusing, but once you get a feel for how the universe works and who the characters are, it just takes off like a rocket, so to speak. It just accelerates through the entire book and does not let up, and is just structured as this incredible high action mystery in which there's all of these central questions that are just slowly and artfully and masterfully revealed incrementally over the course of the book. And you feel like you really, it's just a really gratifying read in that way. It delivers on its promises, it makes grand promises, and then it slowly pays off on those promises in really narratively satisfying ways, which is what you want out of fiction. That's why fiction is pleasurable to read. So that's kind of all I can give away without spoilers. So proceed at your own risk if you haven't read this book. So I will try not to get too bogged down in the actual plot of the book because it's fairly detailed, and I could talk about it probably for half an hour, missing the forest for the trees. Off the top of my head, the only couple gripes that I have with the book are that there's a few tells that it was written in the 70s that are a little bit disruptive to the reading experience and takes you out of the book momentarily, but they're not as glaring as a lot of literature from that era. And it's been criticized as having kind of a sexist outlook on its only female character, which is fair, but I think it's not, it's a very small part of the book. There's a couple spots where the love interest, of course the female is the love interest, which is predictable and a little trite. And there's some bits where the authors talk about how much she misses gossip and shopping for clothing because she's lost in deep space with all the male protagonists. And that was cornball. Also, they use the word rape as a slur in place of the F word, presumably, I think, because of editorial pressure, I would guess. I don't know if there was a strong censorial effort made at pocketbook science fiction in 1974 that might account for it. They only use it a few times, but it's pretty rough. It definitely kind of takes you aback, and I'm not like a pearl clutcher or super precious about language, but it definitely is. It reminds you that you're reading a book that was written many decades ago. My only other real gripe is that the authors are not always that good at exposition. So for most of the book, the exposition is executed flawlessly. It's just enough information provided to you at the right times in a way that is plausible and logical, works with the plot. And then sometimes there are just these giant info dumps that happen in spans of pages and pages and pages of just people explaining the plot. And I wish that they would have just made the book a little bit longer and spent the time to keep up that pace of just giving you the slow drip of info and allowing you to discover it for yourself. Specifically, there's a part about 3/4 of the way through the book that's just the aliens taking a walk with some of the human characters and explaining basically the entire backstory, giving all of the background information underlaid all of these mysteries that were central to the plot, and they just tell them. And I guess it was so complicated in terms of providing kind of an ecological overview of how the aliens work, how they're politically organized, etc., that it would have been hard. It would have taken a very long time to demonstrate all of that through narrative. But it got boring. It was interesting in terms of the actual subject matter, and it was well thought out and excuse me, definitely relevant to the rest of the book that followed it. But just, it dragged. Other than that, I have basically nothing bad to say about this book. That's not true. The romance story is really... So two criticisms. The romance is boring and just kind of serves as narrative glue. It feels obligatory. It was just kind of shoehorned in there. Doesn't move the plot forward, and I don't care. I would struggle to believe that anybody would really be moved by the romance story between the captain protagonist and Sally, the female noble woman / anthropologist, xenoanthropologist, at least within the context of this story. So that was annoying. And there were also, on a similar note, a few characters that were a little too cardboard, a little too predictable. And it wasn't the characters that you would necessarily think would be predictable. There's a couple characters, Burry the trader, the Muslim trader, Trader, and Kutuzov, I think is how you pronounce it, the Russian admiral involved in the expedition to the alien homeworld, who should be kind of cardboard cutout villain characters, but they end up being a couple of the most interesting, and a few of the other characters, like the comic relief characters, or the priest character or the scientist, who are narratively more, not more important, but they're centrally, like, very narratively important to the story. Narratively important to the story. Is that redundant? End up not really having significant character arcs. There's also a lot of characters, like all the midshipmen, all of the subordinate officers aboard the Navy vessel, just kind of get lost in this undifferentiated slurry where they're hard to tell apart, and they have backstories and personalities, but none of it really matters, or doesn't feel that way. So those are the criticisms. The things that it does really incredibly well are, like I said, it's this incredibly gratifying mystery, and I don't typically read mystery novels, but I can see what the appeal is, because I think really great science fiction, that's kind of how it works, is you construct this huge cosmology that is unfamiliar, and you pose questions about it, and then those questions are gradually answered throughout the course of the book, and it pays off, and it's all internally logically consistent. This is the kind of science fiction that I really like. These big, huge scope sci-fi stories with big ideas that feel personally relevant, that help give a sense of context to man's place in the universe, etc., that make you that logically could be superimposed on your own experience of the real world, and it would kind of make sense. And this does it really, really well. Also, I think it's absolutely the most interesting and sophisticated and adult rendition of a first contact story that I've ever seen or read. Adult as in, plausibly, this is how intelligent aliens, an intelligent alien society with a culture would respond to first contact with the human species. And I feel like in first contact stories, it's always some unanimous response based on really narrow sets of motivations that are generated on, like, a species level or an instinctual level. So all the aliens want to kill us because they're hostile, and they're animals, or they're evil, and that's a lot of my favorite sci-fi. So I'm not necessarily criticizing that kind of a story. Or the aliens are inherently benign or curious about humanity. They have some kind of caretaker role. They're here to guide us through our next stage of evolution. They want to impart knowledge and wisdom and learn about us, protect us, etc. And this is neither of those. It's both and neither. It's a culture clash novel in which a human empire beset by all of these political and cultural complexities encounters another equally complicated alien culture that is motivated by a number of different conflicting self-interests and political blocs who are constrained by their material and biological circumstances. And this creates a slow-building inherent conflict and set of conflicts between the two species that are apparently not resolvable. So overall thoughts, I would give this a solid, like, 8.5 out of 10. It's one of the best sci-fi books that I've read. I think it's friendly for any age. There's something there that will be amusing or thought-provoking or exciting to basically anyone. I think it's kind of it's like a Rosetta Stone of sci-fi. Almost, it's every genre of sci-fi. It's the swashbuckling Buck Rogers stuff. It's space opera. It's hard sci-fi. It's military sci-fi. It's all of these things, and it's all of those things in a way that forms a cohesive whole that really works. The quality of the writing is really good. The characters are good enough to hold your attention, and it's very, like, really memorable. I know that this is going to stick in my memory for a long time. This is going to be a mental benchmark that I'm going to think about a lot when I'm reading other books. So it is a bigger book, like I said. But read it. It's worth it. It's completely worth the time. I at no point did I feel like I was spinning my wheels or wasting my time, or that I would be enjoying watching something on Netflix more than reading this book. This is what you want. It's a big chunk of a world that you want to live in for about that amount of time, and it never gets boring. It never becomes unsatisfying, and it scratches a bunch of itches that you may have as a sci-fi reader. So this gets my basically unequivocal stamp of approval. Thanks for watching, guys.